Good day to you all. My name is Donato and I'm the hostess with the mostest. Welcome to my latest podcast. Yes, I know. I haven't been doing many podcasts for a long time. But when I got the message from this next guest who said yes to coming on to the show, I couldn't resist to say, right, I better put a podcast out for this. And it'll be a guest like no other. It's absolutely amazing athlete, as well as being an amazing athlete and globe-trotting sensation. Also, a very amazing YouTuber with over 100,000 subscribers so far, 120, 130,000, growing all the time. Absolutely sensational. And right now, I feel absolutely glad all over. I'm feeling glad all over. Yes, I'm glad all over, baby. So yes, there's an absolute theme here. And as in the words of Austin Powers, yeah, baby, yeah. I think this particular song might give you a clue as to who it may be. You know who it is. In case you didn't hear that, that said, yes, for those of you from the 70s, remember your glam rock? Yes, Sweet from the 70s, Fox on the Run. Welcome, none other than Matt Fox. Hello, welcome to the show. Have you ever had an intro like that, Matt?
I was just about to say that's a very unique introduction, and I really appreciate it because I haven't had too many introduction songs before the actual guest is introduced. So glad to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation, and looking forward to talking about running, travel, whatever else comes to mind.
Absolutely, Matt. As I say, it's an absolute privilege having you on the show because I've been following you for many years, and also I had the privilege of meeting you face to face in person at one of the events a couple of years back. So we've already had a chat and sort of kept in touch, but seeing how you've progressed. So we're going to go through lots of things, Matt. You know, it's a bit like This Is Your Life from the show. And obviously, for those who remember that song, that was Sweet from 1972, I think, Fox on the Run. And obviously, I thought it was quite apt that you are Matt Fox and you do a lot of running. But for those who want to stick around, and then at the end, we're going to do the usual Fast Five and Furious, a little bit of banter. But also for those of you who are YouTubers or looking to YouTube, we might be asking Matt, if we have some time at the end, some top tips. Obviously, being a plaque holder, what is it, silver plate? Is it called, Matt, or what's the trophy that you have when you get past 100,000?
I don't know what it's actually called other than the 100,000 subscriber plate. In fact, I don't even have it with me right now. I've moved house a couple of times since then, but I think it's the bronze. It could be the silver. I don't even know. But yeah, that was about a year and a half ago now. So yeah, it was obviously an honor to receive the plaque. And yeah, more than happy to answer any questions about YouTube. Although I say this all the time, you know, I'm not even though we've built a channel that's seen, you know, 137,000, whatever it is, subscribers, I never really have the best tips because I feel like I'm just standing in front of an athlete, asking them questions and publishing it with very little real editing. But I'm happy to answer any questions that you have for sure.
I think that in itself, Matt, speaks volumes of what you need to do when starting a YouTube. But we'll maybe go back to that. But for a lot of people who are watching this now, and may not know a lot about you in terms of your personal life or whatever. So in the words of This Is Your Life, if you wanted to, give us a quick intro about yourself, what you do, life, family, and all that type of stuff. Because right now, I gather you are in Chicago.
Yes.
And last week you're at Western States 100, which was absolutely amazing. I loved those posts. Although I'm not an ultra runner myself, I still enjoy watching all types of running. So you are quite an international jetter. So yeah, just give us a quick intro, Matt, about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm a runner. I'm a small business owner and own a running and also triathlon nowadays media company. And yeah, those two things sort of take up most of my time. And I guess I graduated from university as a finance degree with a finance degree and worked in the space for only about a year and a half before testing the waters with a few different jobs in marketing. I didn't really like the finance world and learned that pretty quickly. And yeah, kind of very long story short, found myself well, after university, I was also trying to qualify for the Olympic Games in the middle distances. So more specifically the 800 meters. And so that was back in the London Olympics and the Beijing Olympics, 2008 and 2012. And through that time, I was sort of always just at the fringe of making the teams. I was never in any of the Australian national teams, but I was always sort of close. And I guess I finished that period of time, you could say 2014, so 10 years ago now, feeling like I failed as a middle distance runner because I didn't make those teams. And that led me to try and understand more about training and more about running. And that led me to start Sweat Elite. So obviously that's the very condensed story of how it started. But yeah, in 2016, I started Sweat Elite after a small failed venture before that was more like Strava. That was what Sweat Elite was originally supposed to be. It was called Sweat Mobile, but it didn't work out. And then it sort of pivoted to be more of a media company. And here we are in 2024, 7 years down the road, still with challenges, still with plenty of sort of things to solve. But, it grows slowly every year. And I guess I've been very fortunate to have been able to travel around the world multiple times, many times, to places like Kenya, Ethiopia, all throughout Europe, US, pretty much anywhere where the professional athletes would be living and be training, and sort of try and understand what the athletes are doing in training and share as much of that as possible with people, like yourself or anyone that wants to be online to learn more about running and to improve as a runner can view that content. So that's really been the driver of everything I've been doing since 2016.
Yeah. That's absolutely. I mean, that's quite a background there, Matt. I mean, obviously, being a businessman myself, I can understand totally how things can start, stop, change, and adapt. But yeah, Sweat Mobile. I mean, back in the day, I did have an app as well, but something completely different to that. But you call yourself a runner. Obviously, you in terms of running, you're now at the longer distances that you run. Do you feel that it was an obvious progression if you're not getting into the teams at the shorter distance that you should go longer? Is that an obvious progression?
Well, that is probably true for many athletes that were very, very good at 5 and 10K. But to be honest with you, I never, and probably still even to this day, don't consider myself a professional marathon runner, even though, now I'm down to 2 hours and 20. That would be considered pretty close to being professional, I guess. But for someone that doesn't quite make the national teams in the 5K and 10K, they tend to try and roll the dice and try their luck in the marathon. Now, I've never really viewed myself as trying to compete for a position on an Australian team in the marathon. Why that is, I don't know. I mean, we could get into that, probably quite a long conversation. But for me, the marathon was just more about keeping involved in the sport and staying fit. And I tell this story from time to time. The catalyst or the original reason for getting into running marathons was really off the back of someone, one of my friends thinking that I just couldn't break 3 hours. He was convinced that I couldn't break 3 hours. It was a situation where, well, looping back to Sweat Mobile, one of the co-founders in that group, he's actually one of the best middle distance runners from the United States of all time. His name's Nick Simmons. He came 5th at the London Olympics in the 800 meters. He ran 142.95, which is, there's probably only less than 50 people in history that have run faster than that. Yeah. And he had finished middle distance running by 2016, and he decided to run the Honolulu Marathon in Hawaii. And he set this public thing about trying to break 3 hours, and he missed it. He ran 3:02. And my friend and I were sort of observing this thing playing out. And I said to him, do you think I could break 3 hours if I had 6 months of training? And my friend said, I don't think you could. And I said, why do you think that? And he said, I just think you're too fast twitch. I don't think you've got enough sort of aerobic endurance. And plus, you haven't been running for 3.5 years. So I don't think you can do it. And so I took the challenge up and said, okay, I'm going to try and break 3 hours. And fast forward 6 months, I did run 2:59. It was probably to this day equal to or potentially the hardest marathon I've ever done, even though it's the slowest marathon I've ever done. But yeah, around 2:59.36, and then just caught the bug, I guess, from there, and thought, okay, well, if I can do this off 6 months training, maybe I could break 2:50 one day. And then it just progressed from there every year. And now here I am in 2024, quite stuck on the 2 hour and 20 minute barrier, which I've been trying to break for the good part of 3 years. And I'm pretty confident this year I'll have a good chance of getting it towards the end of the year. So we'll see.
Wow. It is one of those things. And obviously there was that bit of, I don't know how you describe it on social media, where you'd said something about the 2:20 on, I think it was Instagram, and it sort of provoked a lot of comments from people saying, oh, is it really that much of a thing? Because sometimes people can sometimes focus too much on a particular time or a distance and so on, rather than the actual enjoyment of the process going through the process. But the question of asking you, how did you get into running? Obviously, you were for looking to knock on the Olympics door. My guess is you've been running since you were a wee lad, and you were probably winning races from when you were 3 or 2.
Well, sort of. I was actually very obsessed with.
Or did you develop late?
Well, I was always, I would say, honestly speaking, I was always quite naturally talented at sprinting. So 100 meters, 200 meters, in high
Yeah.
school and junior school, I would always do pretty well in the school events. But I was very focused on Australian football until I was 17 years old. So that was my life. That was everything I wanted to do. And the running was a secondary, even though I would, sometimes win or come top 3 at the state champs or regional champs at 100 meters. It was always like, yeah, but that doesn't really matter. The football is everything. So that was where my head was at until 17. And then when you're 17, at least in Australia, and I think the same thing applies for many football codes or basketball or so forth. When you're 17, there's the year of the draft. So that's when all of the big clubs are looking for their next draft picks coming out of high school. And in that year, it's critical that you play very well, because that's the year that all of the clubs are watching all of the big games when you're 17. And in the second game of the year, and the season has 24 games, the second game of the year, I badly broke my wrist to the point where I needed surgery, and I was out for the whole year. And I still have a pretty major scar through the middle of my hand here, which holds a plate in the middle of my, which basically holds my wrist.
Holds your hand together.
Hand to my arm.
Wow.
It's fine now. I mean, the only thing is I have slight restriction when I do push-ups. It's a little bit stiff, but that put me out for the whole year. So what happened was, I thought to myself, if I have any chance of making the Australian Football League the following year, which is much harder to do as a non-17-year-old, my only chance was to get as good as possible at running, because one of the weightings placed quite highly on being drafted to a club was the 3K time trial and the 100-meter sprint. And I thought, of all people in Australia, I'm probably going to be one of the best at both of those two things as a football player, not as a regular runner. And so I trained really hard. And at the end of that year, when I was 17, I came 5th in the national championships in the 800 meters for high school kids. And so I had this difficult decision to make at that point. It was like, do I carry on and try to... So this is the end of 2004. And so I thought, do I carry on and try to make the 2008 Olympic Games, or do I try and make the Australian Football League? And I got word of some information that my chances were pretty small to make the Australian Football League at that point, just because I missed the whole year. And so so it was at that point that I thought, okay, well, that's failed. I'm now going to try and make the 2008 Olympic Games. And ultimately I did not, but so many good things came as a result of making that decision. And I guess I would never be here today talking to you on this podcast from Chicago if I didn't make that decision either. So exactly. That's basically how I got into running originally. It was off the back of a football injury.
I mean, when you say football, for those who maybe don't follow this is Australian rules football, isn't it? Yeah, which is completely different to soccer or football in the UK, as say soccer in the US. So obviously, because right now I think it's the European Championships and also the South America. I think in the US there's the America's Cup as well. So whenever people say football, they think it's just a little round ball that you kick with your feet. But Aussie rules, my God, it's a completely different world. I mean, you have to be proper physical in that, don't you? There's no prisoners are taken in that game, is there?
You're exactly right. And funnily enough, in a weird way, the training for that, I wouldn't say it's hindered my marathon, but I have thought about this a little bit more lately. I didn't think about this at all until maybe 2 years ago. And it's that when I was 15, 16, 17, because I was so focused on making the Australian Football League, I was doing a lot of gym, a lot of weights. Even as a 16, 17-year-old, I was lifting heavy. And I built a lot of, well, not a lot, but, for a runner, I guess, quite a lot of upper body muscle. And that, in a weird way now, when you talk about performance in marathon, it's actually hindering me in a way, because I'm unable to remove that upper body muscle. And I'm actually for a 220 runner, I'm 73 kilos. That's really heavy for a 220 runner. Yeah. Most sub 220 runners are in the 60s, or they're, I don't think I've met anyone that, I'm sure there's people out there, but I don't think I've met anyone that's run 220 that's as heavy as I am. And so, and a lot of that weight is in the upper body, and it's very difficult to get rid of that as well. And so I'm actually sort of sitting there now thinking, I'm 37. I've probably only got another 3 or 4 years to, people can improve well into their 40s, but it's probably only 2 or 3 years that I want to keep doing this, at least trying to search for the fastest possible time. And part of that is weight and body composition. And I'm trying to think, how could I, if possible, reduce some of this upper body mass? But the point is, yes, it is very physical, Australian Football League. And I was doing all those weights so that I could take on that sort of physical, those physical challenges in the sport, because it's pretty full on. It's pretty rough. I mean, broke my wrist for a full year. That might say something, but there was a lot of other small injuries in there as well. But I do love the sport, and I still, whenever I go home, I try and watch some games live.
It's one of those. I love watching it. It's a bit like Gaelic football, the same. I love watching all sorts of sports. It's just wonderful seeing the competitiveness and how people go about it. And even I watch ice hockey, field hockey. It's all good stuff. But you mentioned, we'll touch on a bit in terms of marathon running, marathon training, and obviously for the audience who are watching them, might talk about weight. Obviously, a bit of a warning, with red and all that not to obsess about weight. But often people talk about it. I think for me, I tend to eat what I want, drink what I want. Obviously, I'm not at elite level, although I am at sorry, I'll joke aside. I am at elite level for my age, being at England Masters. But I don't worry or obsess about weight. But I guess for a lot of elite people, or people who are certainly around the 2 hours, 2 hours 5, 2 hours 10, need to monitor their calorie intake. Do you monitor very religiously what you eat and drink each day, Matt?
So
morning, noon, and night.
I agree with you. This is a bit of a touchy subject, and there's a dark side to this, of course, and you need to be very careful of that. And this is something that I feel like I almost feel a little bit, not irresponsible, but out of my league to discuss in depth. But what I'm about to say is the way,
because I'm guessing neither of us are nutritionists, are we? You're not a qualified nutritionist. I'm not a qualified nutritionist. So we're only talking about our own experience. So please
exactly. And I'm not very familiar with, transparently speaking, the mental health side of this, as in the, eating disorders, the REDS. I know, I'm very familiar with it, as in I've heard a lot about it, but I've never experienced any of that myself. So I know that there's a dark side, a little bit of a dark side to this, but how I'm approaching this, and I don't recommend anyone else take this approach. I'm just saying this is how I'm approaching this. Is I don't really track calories specifically, no, but what I do try and do is, because I've tried this twice now and it's worked. And in order for me to lose about 3 or 4 kilos, which brings me down to about 70 kilos, which is actually what I raced my best marathon ever at. That's when I ran 220. I was at 70 kilos. Is I try to eat basically only organic food. So I try to avoid all processed food. I try to eat only fruit, vegetables, meat, and nuts. And I'll also go relatively low carb when I'm not near a hard workout. But it's really important to distinguish between if you're very close to a hard workout or if you're not. Because if you're doing low intensity stuff and you're in sort of what people call zone 1 or zone 2, your system can run relatively well off fat and carbs together, and even off relatively low carb and quite high fat, because you're not asking for any sort of very fast movements. You're not asking for very high intensity work. And so as a result, you can be in a relatively low carbohydrate state and even in a calorie deficit and train those days reasonably well. But when it comes to the really hard workouts, especially the long runs, when we're getting up to 2.5, 3 hours, you cannot do those workouts well without a high amount of carbohydrates. And so what I will do is I tend to stick to the rule of about 2 large meals. So that would mean if it's a Sunday morning long run, the lunch and dinner on Saturday and the very small snack before the run on Sunday would be very high carb. So that's when I would go loads of rice, loads of pasta, and those meals would be predominantly carbohydrate based with a little bit of fat and protein. Then the meal after the really hard workout would be the same. But then when I exit that period of time and I go back to easy days, so typically I'll do a hard workout on a Sunday and then on a Thursday or on a Wednesday. So when I get to Monday and Tuesday, I'll go quite low carb and I'll basically go fruit, vegetables, and lean meat. And I'm probably in a little bit of a calorie deficit at that point. But I did this last year for 3 months, and I went from 73.7 kilos, basically exactly what I am now. I'm 73.0 now, I think. And I went down to 70, and I started to run very, very well again. I wasn't able to defeat the muscle cramps at the end of races, but I ran a really quick half marathon. Unfortunately, I was disqualified from that because I was running in someone else's name by mistake. That's a whole other story. But actually,
I thought maybe you had some illegal shoes or something,
No, I was in Japan, and the very short version of that story was I actually ran a half marathon personal best by 11 seconds. I ran 1:06:33. But in Japan, I borrowed a bib off someone, and I asked them, has the name been changed? And I was told casually that it would be handled. And I didn't follow up with that request, and it wasn't handled. And I finished the race, and turns out I was in someone else's name. and I got disqualified. But anyways, whatever. The point is that I think the loss of the weight does help me for sure. But I do think that, and people listening that have tried to do this and have maybe seen the other side of this would know that I know for sure that there's probably a point of diminishing returns when it actually starts to work negatively. When you lose too much weight, you probably lose too much power, too much strength. You've done too many runs and too many workouts in a calorie deficit. Your workouts start to become, not so good. I'm really aware and really trying to understand where that line might be. And if I get near that line, pull back, maybe start to eat more calories again. And so I think it's just you have to be really intelligent about this stuff and really try to understand where those red flags are. But for now, everything's fine. And these next 3 months leading into Chicago Marathon, I'll be doing the same thing.
Right. When you said about being aware, is this listening to your body? It's sending you signals that you need to add a bit more carb or cut back on things. So you're actually listening. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also about really trying to look at the workouts and go, okay, how did I feel at the end of that workout? Like, and was the workout performed well? And if there's any sign of multiple workouts in a row going poorly, or you're struggling at the end of workouts and you're not finishing them very well, that's when you have to go, right, this weight loss, this calorie deficit thing is gone too far for now. We have to try and pull back on that a little bit, get back on top of the workouts. And I feel like it's a pretty fine line, but I think if you're able to really emphasize that period of time around the hard workout, so that 2 meals before, the 2 meals after, and make sure they're very high in white rice, pasta, bread. I feel like it's hard. It's hard to go wrong. I think where people go wrong with this, from what I understand, is they sit in a calorie deficit all the time and they're going pretty low carb all the time, and they're not doing those mini loads around the hard days. And I think those mini loads around the hard days are the key here, in order to not one not go crazy, and two, also still train quite well. And I've had a fair few easy runs of 8 to 10 to 12 miles on low carb. And to be honest with you, like after an hour and 10 minutes, when I've got maybe 2-3 miles to go, I'll start to feel kind of a little bit like the last mile of a marathon, when I'm like, wow, I feel really depleted. But it doesn't matter on an easy run. You're not trying to perform those days. You're just trying to get through the time. And it seems to have worked so far. So I'll keep experimenting with this stuff and hopefully not make too many mistakes.
Excellent. And I'm looking forward to the book. So I'm guessing then you diarize or journal at the end of each training session how you feel, what's been happening. And so you've got a track of food. Because I actually posed a question to some people if they carb load for a long run. And what I meant is what you've just said. But people, obviously, some people take the extreme, like they started carbohydrating since Wednesday. I said, I didn't mean that. I meant the day before. Do you eat pasta, rice, for heaven's sake? And I guess sometimes for me, because whilst I don't do religiously what you do, Matt, I mean, for me, it tends to be carb all the time. I guess probably being Italian, it's pasta, not pasta every day and pizza or rice, but, I do add a bit of variety. You can do lots of different types of pasta, can't you? But it's still pasta. It's fascinating on the carb, the weight thing. And I'm glad you said what you said, Matt, as well about, there is a dark side to this, but I've seen time and time again, a lot of guys and gals who've commented that they've ran their best marathons not at the lightest weight. Now, they tend to have come from a 208, 209 marathon area, so they are at the elite sharp end. And I remember one American guy commenting he was, I think, 2 kilos heavier, but ran his best time. So it is a fine line, and it's different for different people, isn't it? Height, weight, and so on and so forth. So 2 kilo for someone who's 6.5 foot may not be as much as someone who's 5'2", so it's for those listening, and watching, take that into account. But you mentioned Chicago. So I was going to ask you, what's your next big race? Would you say Chicago? Are you staying in Chicago from now till then? Are you, basically going to do Route 66 and all that type of stuff?
Yeah, so I live in Chicago now. My fiance, who I'm getting married to in a few months, lives in Chicago, and I love it here. I've spent most of this year here, and Chicago Marathon is the next big race for me. I think I'll do at least 2, maybe 3 marathons in the fall. I quite like the idea of spreading my bets and doing a couple of them, and that's a whole other conversation. I think that people with a lot of lifetime miles, and especially people that have done a lot of marathons, I think I've done 18 or 19 now, I think you can do that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to really new runners that haven't got a lot of lifetime miles. But yes, I will do Chicago. I'll do probably at least 1 or maybe even 2 more. I'm sort of working those out now. But that's in 90. I think I worked out it was 100 days to go last week on Friday, so it must be 96 or 95 now. So yeah, getting pretty close, and the really hard work starts in a couple of weeks. So I'm looking forward to it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Chicago is one of my favorites. At the time, it was my PB course, but it's a beautiful course. I mean, absolutely. I mean, people complain about the little bridge at the very end. I mean, come on, you know,
the big hill.
Yeah, the big hill, at the very end, which lasts, I think, about 100 meters. But, you've ran all that. It is flat as a pancake. I love the people of Chicago, and obviously being a bit biased with the deep dish pizza that Chicago is famous for. It is brilliant. I'm very envious of you, Matt. So I might be cribbing for a spare bed somewhere or whatever, but I don't want to impose on you and your fiance or whatever flying over to Chicago.
Unfortunately, the only spare bed we have was taken about a year ago, so I'm sorry to say, but yeah.
No, there'll be a queue from everyone else.
There's been a few requests for that, but
but so you're going to base yourself at Chicago. I'm very impressed with that. But in terms of your training, you mentioned, we'll touch on the training, and you said about carbing before long runs and stuff. So do you have your plan? So from now to Chicago, it's about 3 months ish, isn't it?
I think
it's just after
weeks,
Berlin. Yeah. So
yep.
I've literally just started my Berlin training, so it's 12 weeks. So Chicago, I think, is a couple of weeks after or a week after.
Yep.
Do you work on a plan for you've already plotted it out, or do you plot it out as you go along, or do you have week by week and then try and stick to that week, or 10 days, or how do you plan your big race training?
Yeah, good question. I've actually coached myself to most of the last 3 years of marathons, but this build up, I'm joining a team here in Chicago who have 6 people, I think it is. It could be 5. It's at least 5 guys that are faster than me in the marathon. And so that's really exciting for me, because I think the one thing that I've missed or lacked in training in the last 3 years is having people to push me in training, especially in the long runs. And so I'm actually going to be joining a group here run by a coach called Michael, he's in Second City Track Club is the club name. And they're based just down the road here. They train at the track on Wednesdays, and they do long runs on Sundays. And I'll be joining them and basically just doing whatever they do. I know, based on knowing Michael for about 3.5 years now, that they do very similar sort of training to what I do. And I think I sometimes do think, and I advise this to people, is if you're going to set your own training, and you find a group of people, even if it's one person, doing something that's even remotely similar to what you want to do, you may actually get more benefit out of just joining the other person and changing the training a little bit than doing it yourself, because I think that there's quite a lot to gain from joining people. And that's really obvious to me when I go and visit Kenya and Ethiopia, especially Kenya, but I would say probably equally Ethiopia, in that they just train in numbers. They train in groups. They hold each other accountable. They push themselves in training. When it gets really hard at the end of long runs, you have to figure out how to deal with that. And oftentimes it's not necessarily it's funny, like at the end of, especially when it's hot, at the end of really long runs, when you're training for the marathon, when you get up to 20 miles, 22, 24 miles, it's obviously physically very difficult to run something that long and that hard. But oftentimes it's your mind that will start to give up much earlier than your body will. And I think having a group of people to train with and to push yourself, it kind of changes that dynamic a little bit, because you're held accountable. You don't really want to show them that you're soft, or you want to try and keep up with them, and even try and maybe beat them at the end of the training run if that's important to you. I don't necessarily always advise racing and training, but I do think that that's a big deal. And if you're used to being able to execute in the long runs really well through the aspect of the team, I think that's really powerful. So back to answering your question, I don't have to actually plan any of this training. It's just about turning up on Wednesday mornings and on Sunday mornings and doing what the group are doing. And I have trust in the group, because Michael, the coach, has coached so many people to run faster times than what I've run. And there's many guys in the group that have run faster than me. So I think that just joining them is going to be really beneficial for me.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, I always say, when you're trying to break a particular time, and I do feel for you, because you said you've been trying now, is it 3 years to break 220? Whilst you've ran 220 and X seconds, you want to go under 220. I do feel your frustration, because, and I've been there, where you think you've hit a ceiling, and it's amazing how when you change, and I totally concur, when you're with other people, changing, adapting, I think this will be what I call the magic sauce. People often say, what's the magic sauce in running? I think whilst I've not met that Michael and the Second City Club, I believe this will be the catalyst to you not only breaking 220, you'll surprise yourself how close. Because I know you mentioned maybe a 217 or 2. We just don't know. I just think, seeing that smile there, Matt, and the work that you put in, you deserve to go quicker. And with a bit of magic sauce, I don't know, with maybe some of the new hyper shoes that are coming along. People talk about shoes, but as my 95-year-old dad tells me, who has no running experience, has never run in his life apart from running away from bulls and sheep when he was a farmer, is that it's not the shoes that make you fast, it's your legs. So, right. And obviously you're doing the training for that, Matt. But what else would you say is running with people helps? What else would you say helps in terms of the training and racing? Is there any other little things you think you could throw in there?
I think we've sort of half touched on the diet part, and we talked about weight loss, but let's not talk about weight loss. Let's talk about diet. Yeah. I think just making sure that I used to dismiss this topic, to be honest. I used to just think, as long as you're eating food, it's fine. But I think the more I've learned over time, the more I've realized that if you do pay quite close attention to this, it can be pretty beneficial, especially with the timing of carbs. I mean, it's obvious, but if you really try and, it sort of does half link to what I was talking about before, but if you do really try and time your carbohydrate intake to be very slanted, very high towards the hard workouts, that can actually play a pretty big role. I don't think it necessarily makes a big difference when you're talking about training for like the 1500 or the 5K, when the workouts are kind of short, sharp, high intensity. The total overall volume or total overall time of hard work might be 10 to 20 minutes. I think that's less important to have a load of carbs. But when we're talking about long runs, where the hard work can be 60 minutes plus of what I would call, where your heart rate's LT, like close to threshold or higher, carbohydrates are going to be huge. And timing those carbohydrates is going to be really key. The other thing I think that I've been really trying to work on lately, and I have successfully, although it's sort of taken a bit of time to navigate the travel, is sleep, and really trying to make sure that you're getting not only enough sleep, but good quality sleep. And I think that I went through a long phase of sleeping quite poorly, and it was mostly when I was traveling. And it got to the point where it was really kind of bugging me. I was sort of training not so well anymore, and I was sort of feeling a little bit irritable all the time, and it was just inconsistent sleep. And I sort of went on this quest about, I don't know, probably about a year ago to try and improve my sleep. And I connected with a brand. I won't plug them in here, but I've got onto some magnesium powder, which really helps my sleep. I also just make sure that the sleep environment is really consistent all the time. I think the temperature of the room for me is a huge deal. And I've gotten to the point now when I've sort of slept 8 hours pretty much every night over the last month, and that makes a huge difference, not only to running but just to your life in general. It's how you feel, how you can work, how your relationships are, just your mood. So I think that's a pretty big deal. And I think if you've got the diet right and you've got the sleep right, and those two things, the diet's probably a little bit easier to get right because it's all of it's really your decision and your discipline. Whereas the sleep comes down to a little bit of randomness and luck. Like sometimes you can plan to sleep all you want, and then just for whatever reason you wake up and can't go back to sleep. But the point is, if you get those two things right, I feel like you're setting yourself up to train as best you possibly can. And I think at that point you have to start to look at the small things like, your gear. Does it suit you? I don't really know a lot about shoes, but there's all those topics. And then training with the right people. And I think if you can get the diet right, the sleep right, and then the training environment right, like if you love to train on your own and you love the places that you're training, the track, the road, the park, wherever you are, or the group that you're training with, if you get those things right, I feel like everything else sort of works out for it. Everything else just works out on its own. So but if you sort of try and look at it as a triangle in terms of training environment and vibe, sleep and diet, and you look at and you try and get all those things right, you'll be motivated, you'll enjoy training, and hopefully you'll see some improvement as well.
Wow, that's brilliant, Matt. You've said succinctly what I put in a video a couple of years back, the 3 pillars of running, which is sleep, diet, and the right training. So I didn't prompt you on that, which is amazing that you picked on. Sleep is so essential. And I know some people might be watching this and have trouble sleeping. Sometimes I believe, obviously like yourself being an international jet setter, it is difficult when you're in different time zones and different, planes here, there, everywhere, planes, trains, automobiles, is sleep when you can. But sometimes even if I do wake up in the middle of the night, in my brain, my psyche is saying I'm still resting. so I don't stress over not sleeping totally. So I believe rest is just, and sometimes naps, power naps can help.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, in terms of, I was following a line of thought with the sleep and the training. From that, being an international jet setter, I have come across some guys who've been to your Kenyan, I don't know what you would call them, training camps,
Yeah.
is it? And I was going to ask you about that. Do you still do those? Is it a regular thing? And you mentioned also other countries as well. I mean, or whatever. I mean, tell us more about that side of your business in terms of the traveling, because the guy you told me about, he's gone to Kenya. He's got the same. You've got, hold your wrist up. You've got a Kenyan wristband on.
Yeah.
He's
I
got a
do.
very same wristband,
Yeah.
and he was telling me how much he enjoyed his time with you and the group. And I mean, he's a really good coach here in local to me as well. I've never met him before, but as you do, you know, I guess you get the same, don't you, Matt? People come up to you, oh, are you that YouTuber?
Yeah.
Or are you Matt? And so, you know, are you Donato? Yeah, I am. You know, and then they get talking and then mention other YouTubers, and your name came up, and he said, oh, and I asked him about his wristband. He says, oh, I picked that up when I was with Matt Fox in Kenya. I'm like, what the hell? So tell us more about these.
Yeah, so they've been always sort of a side thing, and they've really come about as a result of, in 2018. So I went to Kenya for the first time in 2017, in January, I think it was, might have been February. And I guess we got a lot of questions just through the Facebook DMs and through the Instagram DMs about training in Kenya. I would say not a lot, but maybe like one every 2 or 3 weeks. Someone would be like, how do you go to, where do you fly into? Where do you stay? And I was spending all this time sort of answering questions. And I just thought to myself randomly, after I had like the 8th question in maybe 6 months, I was like, why don't I just do a training camp, and then people can all join this training? So then people don't ask these, like, it's all, I'll basically make a camp answering all these questions. Like, so fly into here, you can come and stay here, but we'll all do it as a group. And so I did the first one, and I think 12 people came in 2018, and it was a lot of fun. And so I just thought to myself, after that, I'll try and do one every year. And we have done one basically every year since. Mm-hmm. The only reason why I'm not doing one this year is because I probably could hire someone to take one for me, but I have to stay in the United States this year because I'm going through a process of changing visa. And I actually can't leave the US until that's been processed. I mean, I can, but if I do, I have to abandon that visa and start again. So it's a bit of a strange.
We don't want to do that. No, I understand all about immigrations. It's the same here in the UK for people coming here, or I guess it's the same in Oz, but
it is the same in Australia. I actually know of some people that have had to do that in Australia as well. So the only reason why one's not happening this year is because I'm sort of locked in this country. But I think in future we'll probably keep having them. I think we've had 6 now in Kenya, and they've been a lot of fun. We had one in Portugal. We did have one this year. It was in Portugal in January before I actually entered the States in February. But I think we'll continue to have them. They've been really fun. We've always had between sort of 8 and up to 20 people come to the camps, and people have learned a lot. And they've typically been 2 weeks long. We'll stay in Iten, which is the running hub of Kenya. It's about an hour from Eldoret Airport, which is about a 45-minute flight north of Nairobi Airport. And we have a lot of fun. It's very social. We do a lot of training every single day. We meet a lot of professional athletes. We learn all about the diet and the culture, and we do we join some of the training groups on some of the easy runs. It's a lot of fun. People tend to leave with a lot of new learnings and a lot of new friends. And I'm actually curious to know who this person was, because we probably had about, probably from the UK alone, we probably had about 25 people come to these camps over the years. So it could be one of a few people.
I won't mention him by name on here, but I say he is a running coach and a top runner, as far as I could tell. He's runs fast time. So he did rave about it and said how good it was. Having been to Kenya myself, but that was more on a safari and beach holiday, long before I was ever running. I do love Kenya and the Kenyan people. It is fantastic out there. But I was just fascinated to ask about that. But in terms of your traveling, because you have traveled literally all over the world, and you can be as biased as you want, but do you have like your top 3 countries or top 3 cities that you've been to? And it could be running related, or it could be not running related. So
Okay, I think it's funny because I have a lot of favorite cities, and one thing I've noticed is, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, the cost of living and the price of visiting some places is wildly varies. But let's leave cost out of it. I think when it comes to my favorite 3 running cities, I would say St. Moritz is probably number 1. And it's funny how I preface by saying the cost of living, that is so expensive there, is insane. But that is probably the best place I've ever been for running. I would say just the track being right in the middle of town. There's mountains everywhere. It's a perfect altitude. There's this beautiful lake. It's absolutely stunning. Font-Romeu is pretty good as well. That's at altitude. I would say that's probably Font-Romeu, Font-Romeu. Font-Romeu. It's in the French Pyrenees. I would put that as number 3, and probably my number 2, I would probably say, is Flagstaff. And these are favorite cities to go and train for running. I would say Flagstaff is probably number 2. Although if I sat there and really sort of thought about
Flagstaff, Arizona, is that right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So all 3 of those places are at altitude. They're all great for training. They're all very relatively small and pretty peaceful, but probably have the best running facilities in the world. It's probably a little bit harsh to leave Boulder out of that top 3, but I'd say Boulder would be a close 4th, or maybe I could switch out Font-Romeu over Boulder. But when it comes to just leisurely travel, that's very, very different list. I would say my favorite city in the world is probably Istanbul. I find that city in Turkey, the capital of Turkey. I've got a good friend there that I still coach. I've coached for 2 years. His name's Bulka. Hopefully he's listening to this, because I know he listens to a lot of podcasts I'm on.
He's from Turkey.
He's from Istanbul, and we've gone to visit him twice now, and I absolutely love that city. It's just such a fascinating blend of different cultures. It feels a little bit like Europe, a little bit like Asia, a little bit like Dubai, a little bit like America. It's sort of just got everything mixed together. The cuisine, the food is just incredible. It's very beautiful. I love the way that there's mosques, and then there's churches, and it's like a world for everything there. And the cost of living being very low as well is obviously great for people coming in with euros or US dollars. So that would be my number 1. My number 2, I really like Lisbon, in the capital of Portugal. I think that's a really beautiful place. Lots of really good running towns around Portugal, around Lisbon as well. I would say that's number 2. After that, I'm going to probably say where I started Sweat Elite was actually, so where I registered the domain when I was working remotely in 2016, was in Medellin in Colombia, which is where Narcos happens. I was going
to say Colombia. As soon as you say Colombia, gringo, wow, there's certain substances available there, isn't there?
Yeah. I think there is. I didn't get involved. I didn't get involved in any of that. But in Medellin in Colombia, that's a very beautiful city as well. I really like that place. I'm probably going to go back there as soon as I can, as soon as my visa is processed and I'm allowed to leave the country, because there's a direct flight from here straight down there in about 5 hours. And I don't know. I really like that place. It's very, very different to what it's like in the show Narcos. That was in the late 80s and early 90s, and it's really cleaned itself up now. But it's got a great culture. It's got beautiful food, beautiful mountains. And it was just a great vibe walking around the city. I really liked it. So I'd say those 3 are probably my favorite 3 cities to go and visit. But honestly, if we sat here for 2 hours, I could name another 20 that I love as well. But they're the first 3 that come to mind.
I'm sure you could. And I have a love for food. And it's great that you touched on the food, in Istanbul, in Turkey. And I've not been to Istanbul. I have been to Turkey. And it is fantastic. But I'm a bit biased because my family's from the Mediterranean area. So we do like Mediterranean food. But as you mentioned with Istanbul, the mix of Asia, Europe, obviously the Bosphorus, the river Bosphorus through the middle there. Have you ever thought of doing the triathlon there? Where I think it's the only triathlon where you go across 2 continents.
I haven't thought about that, but I'll have a look at it at some point, because I think after running in about 3 or 4 years, I might try my luck at I haven't fully committed to this yet, because the swimming part just does my head in. Even though I used to be a swimmer in high school, the thought of getting back into swimming, I never really enjoyed it. I was just sort of half decent at it, I guess. But maybe at some point. I am somewhat interested. I'm becoming more and more interested over time in triathlon. But I didn't know about that triathlon, though. That's interesting.
Yeah, there is. Again, I don't know whether it's a full triathlon. And obviously the Ironman is a brand, not a distance, as people tell me. So I don't know what the event, but I do know that the swimming section, I took up open water swimming during lockdown because they cancelled the races, but open water was okay. So it was just another way of having a go. But like yourself, I'm not really a swimmer. I wasn't any good. and I don't like it. But sometimes you literally have to throw yourself in at the deep end, pun intended. But we touched on food, travel food. If I was to say to you the strangest food or different food, because obviously as we go around different countries, everyone has certain delicacies. And I do remember, if you've ever traveled to Peru, that their delicacy is guinea pig.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. And yes, when I asked for guinea pig, they brought the whole guinea pig, the head, the feet, the tails, everything, which was a bit of a shock to me. I thought it would at least be filleted or something. What's the most standout food that you've had, that local delicacy that you thought, maybe not? Because obviously we've seen I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and I think they focus on kangaroos' testicles for some reason. I don't think that's an Australian delicacy somehow, or is it? I don't know. But what's the most oddest delicacy you've come across yourself, Matt, on your travels?
My brother,
whether you've tried it yourself or not.
Yeah, no, I did try this one. So my brother was doing an exchange in China in 2011, and I went to visit him, and he was doing a university exchange just outside of Shanghai, and I tried great white shark in Shanghai. And
wow,
that wasn't great. It wasn't great.
Have a big mouth and everything.
No, it was just served up like a chicken breast, basically. But it was a lot softer. It just was a bit salty, and I don't know. I didn't like it. But that's the first thing that comes to mind. I haven't really eaten a lot of really bizarre foods. I mean, I haven't eaten kangaroo testicles. I've heard of that. But that's the first thing that comes to mind, because I remember eating that thinking, I don't really want to eat that again. But I think the other thing that does come to mind, and this isn't that strange in itself, but in Ethiopia, they have this really weird tradition where they'll eat raw beef. And funnily enough, well, this isn't funny, I guess it sort of is thinking back to it, but I was offered at this sort of social event to try this raw beef, and I tried it, and it tasted okay. I mean, it wasn't great, but I just thought, okay, it's something that they do here. But then about 2 days later, I got very, very sick, like bedridden for days. I don't know if it was, I know I very rarely get sick, by the way, very rarely.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was the beef, but I was in bed for 4 days straight. I could hardly move. I don't know if it was that, if it was something else, but it could have been. Yeah. But I found that a bit strange. Wow. Yeah.
That is quite incredible. We'll do a full circle back to running. And I appreciate your sub-elite, and yours is called sweat elite. But a lot of people watching this podcast might be inspired to take up running, be a beginner runner. What would be your top 2, top 3, top 5, however many top tips if someone wants to get started in running? What would you say to them, Matt? Don't. What would you say?
Don't. I'd say absolutely do, because the people that you'll meet and the experiences that you can experience are unparalleled, they're unrivaled. I love this sport very much, and I'm very glad I got involved. But some of the tips, I would say the first one is, one thing I've really noticed, because I'm coaching nowadays, and I coach a lot of people that started running relatively recently, so maybe since 2020 or 2021, and they all got started off the back of Strava and wearing a GPS watch, and many people that start that way do not know how to run to listen to their body very well. Yeah. And so what I mean by that is, if I tell them to do maybe a 10K or a 6-mile tempo run at 85% effort, people that are so used to looking at numbers on their watch and on Strava, they would find that very hard to do. Even though if you told a 6-year-old kid to do that, they'd probably be able to do it pretty easily because they're like, I'll just run pretty close to my 100% effort, but not quite. And they would finish it probably very well and probably run relatively evenly. Maybe not the first time, but they probably work out quickly. They start to struggle after 5 minutes, and they probably do it the second time well. But I think the point of this is learning how to run without looking at numbers, and learning how to run listening to your body, I think, is a really, really undervalued skill. And what I would do, if possible, is learn how to run, especially easy runs, but even also some hard workouts, where if you want to log it all, you can still do it by logging it all, but keeping discipline here is key. It's to start your watch and just turn it on a screen. So on my Garmin, I can turn it onto the time of day, for example.
Yeah, to the clock.
And so I will start the watch, and then I'll put it onto the time of day, and I won't look at it, and I'll stop it. And to take it to another level, don't even look at it afterwards. Like, look at it the next day on Strava, and then see what pace you ran, if you even care. But I think learning how to run and listen to your body is really undervalued. And the more advanced this technology gets, and the more people start running off the back of GPS watches and Strava, the more difficult this is to do. And so I think that's the first tip, is learning how to run and enjoy running for what it is, as opposed to enjoying seeing fast splits. Enjoying seeing fast splits is great, and I get a big buzz and a big kick out of that too. But I'm really now trying to learn how. Like, nowadays, I'm getting into a pretty good habit of on easy runs. I will do exactly what I just said. I'll start the watch and I'll turn it on to the time of day, and I won't look at it again. And sometimes that's 7:10 mile pace, and sometimes that's 8:20 pace, and it doesn't matter. I don't care. But I'm trying to learn how to, okay, what's my body saying? Do I have any pains and aches? Do I feel good? Do I feel okay? Like, and enjoy the scenery, enjoy the luckily I've got the lakefront here in Chicago. It's very beautiful, but of course there's plenty of other beautiful places, especially in the UK, plenty of great parks and forests. And I think learning how to enjoy running for the adventure side and how you feel is really important. And I find it a little bit of a shame when people really struggle to train unless they have their watch. I think that's a bad place to be. I think you should be able to think to yourself, if my watch ran out of battery or I lost my watch, could I get through the next week of training even without the watch? And I think everyone can, but some people might think that they can't. And if you think that you can't, I think you have to maybe think through why you're doing this and why and how to actually be able to train to effort. Yeah, that's the biggest one. I'm trying to think if there's any more. I think that's sort of the main one, though. I think
what you've said, Matt. I think that is it. I mean, essentially, is enjoy the running. I've got a thing about watches, and for some people on social media think I'm attacking the tech from a tech background. I say no, because some people take it as gospel that the distance is correct, that the height and altitude is correct. I says it's a bit of tech that it's not going to be 100% accurate. And I do recall a professional coach on a weekend I went away, like you do, retreats and training camps. I was at a training camp, and this elite athlete was saying, "Oh, I can't program my watch to things," and basically the coach took the guy down, saying, "What are you doing looking at it for pace? It's trying to connect with a satellite that's thousands of miles away. It's going to be off." And certainly what you've said there, I mean, I coach people as well. And when I've weaned them off the tech, they've got faster. I said, just listen to your body, go on how you feel. And the next time you run a 5K, do not look at that blooming watch, where one guy now covers it up with his buff, and they're running the fastest they've ever ran, purely on feel, rather than looking at the watch. No, that really summed it up brilliantly, Matt. And as I mentioned at the start, the Fast, Five and Furious, to sum things up or whatever, is because it's absolutely brilliant having you on the show. But it's just a bit of fun, and it's A or B. Which one do you want to answer? So if you had a choice of, Fast, Five and Furious, are you ready, Matt? I should put a buzzer on or something, and I say something like this.
Yeah, baby, yeah.
So are you ready, Matt, for the Fast, Five and Furious? You ready to go?
I am ready, yeah.
Right. Tacos or pizza?
Pizza.
Nike or Adidas?
Nike.
A fast 5K or a marathon?
Marathon.
Bungee jumping or zip wire?
Zip wire.
And GoPro or Insta360?
GoPro, although I haven't used the Insta360. So, yeah.
GoPro wins all the day. I'd like to say you've won today's Star Prize, Matt, and here's a new GoPro, but no.
Oh, I love that.
But no, it's been an absolute joy having you on, Matt. I really do appreciate the time that you've taken to come on this show and share your experiences. And I know there's lots of lovely golden nuggets. And those who've been watching, listening through, I would recommend to go back and rewind Matt and listen all the way through again, because there's a lot of gems in there. I didn't pause him and stop him on those things. I'd rather let him go with the flow and keep talking, so keep the flow going there. But it's absolutely brilliant. And now I can see why you are so good and why you're so successful at what you do. And I was going to ask you top tips for the YouTubers out there, or people who are looking to start a YouTuber, as you're I think it's a silver plated or silver medal type thing or whatever. It's, you've gone past 100,000, 130,000. What would be your one key tip for someone who's looking to start a YouTube channel in running?
I appreciate this question, Donato. And to be honest, I have a feeling that you asked me this when we met. And remind me of the race name. I remember where it is. It's in the middle of the UK.
It was the Telford 10K.
Telford, that's it. I was trying to think of the name of the race. I remember where it was. I remember the car park and
where all the fastest people in Britain turn. I didn't know this until I got there. I thought, oh no wonder I'm not in wave one. All sub 30 runners. But Yeah, it's a Telford 10K, not far
That's
from
right.
me.
I was just mind blanking the name of the race. But I remember meeting you actually, and I remember you sort of asked a similar question, and it kind of stumped me because I thought to myself, I really don't know, because I sometimes am surprised myself at the growth of the channel because I don't consider myself a videographer. I just think that I know, and I think this probably came as a result of being involved in the sport for 12 years before I started the channel. I think I just thought to myself, what do people want to learn about, and what do people want to hear from these professional athletes? Do they really want to watch them run? A little bit, yeah, probably, but they've seen that a lot anyway on the races or probably in Instagram reels and so on and so forth. I think what they want to do is they want to learn more specifically about the training. So I've really tried to lean on that and go, well, what do I want to learn about their training? What do I want to learn about why they use this particular thing in training, these shoes, this device, whatever it is, and just try and publish that. And I think, when it comes to YouTube, I think you have to try and think through, like, are people going to be educated by this content? Are they going to be inspired by this content? If it's neither of those two things, and it's not sort of educational or inspiring, I wonder really if there's any place for it on YouTube. I'm not sure. So I don't know if that's a very good answer. I don't know if I have the best tips either, because down the road lives a videographer called Eric Floberg, who you might be familiar with, but he makes running content about his own journey. And when I watch his stuff, his videos are, and he's a good friend of mine. And when I watch his stuff is very cinematic. It's much better, much higher quality than mine.
Yeah.
But when it comes to view counts, we're sometimes quite similar, because people watch his stuff for more of the cinematic feel. People probably watch my stuff more for the raw insights from pro athletes, not necessarily the cinematography. So there's so many ways to go about, doing YouTube well. And sometimes I come across channels that have way, way, way bigger followings than ours. And I watch some videos and I'm like, how does this channel do this? Why do people like this stuff? And then I think to myself, maybe I don't know anything about this YouTube game. So, I don't know. It's funny. I feel like that's a terrible answer, but I really don't think I have a great answer, which is a shame. But I just do think that sometimes, I was inspired to make a YouTube channel because I saw some other workout videos online, and I honestly thought to myself, I think I could do that a little bit better. That's really all it was.
Yeah.
And whether I was right or not, who knows? But at least I tried. I got started, and I think almost all successful YouTubers or anyone making art say the same thing. They're like, just get started. You're probably not going to succeed very quickly, but if you just keep tinkering and keep experimenting with things, eventually you'll find your way. And I think that's probably the best advice that I could give.
Excellent. Absolutely priceless advice there, Matt, and I really appreciate it. As I said, thanks so much for you coming on here all the way from Chicago, and I'm sure everything will be processed fine and you'll be an American citizen in no time, or whatever the immigration rules are. But and also, who knows, I may see you again in the near future, whether it be at Chicago Marathon or some other event around the world. But thank you so much for your time, Matt. Really appreciate it. And take care of yourself, and we'll see you all soon. And who knows, might get you on for a part 2. So anyone who does have any questions directed at Matt, leave them in the comments below, and between me and Matt, we'll answer them. So, and all I can say is I wish you the very best for the build up to Chicago. And I know you're going to smash it. It is an absolutely brilliant course, one of my favorites. And it's like you've done Berlin. I've not done Berlin. So I've got Berlin, you've got Chicago, so we can swap notes. It is brilliant, and obviously, if you are there, I'm sure you'll get to run part of the course as well. And I think you're with some of the best team coaches in their second city track running. So, all the best to you, Matt.
Thanks so much, Noah. Thanks so much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Bye. I think it's winding down now. Has it?